It's been a tough session for the ranking member, Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is accused of sitting on this for weeks. And that part of the process has left a lot of people with some very big question marks on her handling on all of this, and that will linger for her for some time.
Chuck Grassley has been an Iron Man through this process. Dianne Feinstein to his left, the ranking member, and let's drop in now. Judiciary Committee back in action today, 9:40 a.m. Washington time.
The minority, and we did have some motions for the minority, but if you remember, I said that I'll give the minority a chance to make their motions, and then I was going to make a motion that we have a time certain to vote. And so I want to make that motion time certain to vote, but if there is a motion from a minority, I would recognize that motion first.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to subpoena Mark Judge as a witness before our committee.
Okay. Let me hold.
And I'd be happy to speak to it, but I wanted
hold just a minute. Could you make your remarks short, please, and speak now, and then we will vote? Proceed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We heard yesterday from an extraordinarily courageous, strong survivor, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Every one of us, I think, were riveted and powerfully impressed by her truth. We heard her provide details in that story that can be corroborated and other facts that can be uncovered if we hear from other witnesses who have very relevant, important knowledge about what happened to her on that evening in that room. The third person allegedly in the room was Mark Judge. Evidently, he has never been interviewed by the FBI. He has never been questioned by any member of our committee. He has never submitted a detailed account of what he knows. And so I move, Mr. Chairman, that we have him before this committee as a witness. He could be interviewed beforehand on a bipartisan basis. I recognize that he has submitted a cursory, conclusory 6-sentence letter, not even signed by him. It's from his attorney. And I believe we have a responsibility to subpoena, at the very least, Mark Judge before we move to vote. It is our constitutional duty to do everything we can to uncover the truth after hearing yesterday that compelling testimony from Dr. Blasey Ford. And we cannot, in good conscience, vote without hearing at least from Mark Judge. I would submit, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, that there are other witnesses essential for us to hear from. We should hear from the other sexual assault survivors who have come forward with credible and powerful stories. And that will be also, in my view, necessary. But today I am moving that we subpoena Mark Judge.
Before we vote, I will read a letter that we received from Mark Judge last night. As I stated in my attorney, Barbara Van Gelder, September 18th, 2018 letter, I did not ask to be involved in this matter, nor did anyone ask me to be involved. We've told the committee that I do want to comment. When I told the committee that I do not want to comment about these events publicly, as a recovering alcoholic and a cancer survivor, I have struggled with depression and anxiety. As a result, I avoid public speaking. Brent Kavanaugh and I were friends in high school, but we have not spoken directly in several years. I do not recall the events described by Dr. Ford in her testimony before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee today. I never saw Brett act in a manner Dr. Ford describes. I am knowingly submitting this letter under penalty of felony. Mark Judge, witness by Barbara Van Gelder. And he has signed it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond.
On the motion?
Yes, on the motion. If I may respond, that letter is no substitute for an FBI interview.
The answer is no.
Okay.
Mr. Graham.
And it is no substitute for testimony before this committee.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass. Mr. Flake. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
No.
Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono.
Aye.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 11 nays.
The motion is defeated. Now I move, as I said I was going to do, that we set the vote to report out Judge Kavanaugh's nomination at 1:30 p.m. today.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Mr. Cornyn.
That's violating the rules of the committee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass.
Well, this is.
Mr. Flake.
The
Mr.
ram
Crapo.
job continues.
Mr. Tillis. Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Feinstein.
No.
Mr. Leahy.
No, because it violates the customs of this committee.
Mr. Durbin.
It violates them.
No.
Mr. Durbin. Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No.
Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Hirono.
I strongly object. This is just totally ridiculous. What a railroad job. The answer is no, no, no.
Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris.
Second.
They're not answering because this is so unfair, Mr. Chairman.
Breaks our rules and customs.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 11 yeas and 8 nays.
Okay. Motion carried. I'll go to my opening statement now. We have an agenda with 10 judges who are ready to be voted on. Brett Kavanaugh nominated to the Supreme Court. Jonathan Kobus nominated the 8th Circuit and 8 district court judges. We also have 2 bills on the agenda. We will hold over S 3178, the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act. We will vote on S 2785, the DTARE Act, sponsored by Senators Durbin and Graham. This bill combats offensive election interference by foreign adversaries by denying entry to any foreign national who has been deemed to engage in election interference. The amendment I'll be introducing makes clear that the Secretary of Homeland Security will make this decision on who has engaged in election interference in consultation with the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of State. Any foreign national who engages or conspires to engage in improper interference in our elections should not be allowed to enter our country under any circumstances except to stand trial. Yesterday, we heard testimony from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh regarding sexual assault allegations that date back to when the two were in high school. It was difficult and emotional for both of them. At the end of the day, the 3 witnesses Dr. Ford named denied any knowledge of the event she described. Judge Kavanaugh forcefully denied the allegations. The alleged behavior is inconsistent with everything else we know about him. Hundreds of people, including women he knew in high school, attested to his character and fundamental decency as a person, both in high school and now. He is widely regarded as an excellent husband, father, friend, coach, professor, and judge. He has an exemplary record of being at the forefront of women's advancement in the legal profession, and he's been through 6 FBI full-time background investigations, and no issues of sexual misconduct were uncovered. It's a fundamental aspect of fairness and due process that the accuser have the burden of proving allegations. It's true yesterday's hearing was not a trial, but trials have rules based on common sense notions of fairness and due process, not the other way around. A person had allegations made against him in a public way, and his reputation and livelihood were at stake. It was only fair that his accuser had the burden of proof. In my opinion, this wasn't met. Hey, you folks that are photographers know that you're supposed to sit down. Maybe you just ought to leave the room if you don't know what the rules are. I found Dr. Ford's testimony credible and believe she's sincere in her version of the facts. But I also found Judge Kavanaugh's testimony credible and sincere. Ultimately, the existing evidence, including the statement of 3 alleged eyewitnesses named by Dr. Ford, refutes Dr. Ford's version of the facts. There is simply no reason to deny Judge Kavanaugh a seat on the Supreme Court on the basis of evidence presented to us. I reopened the hearing at the assistance of Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Dr. Ford wanted to be heard, and we gave her that opportunity. Not one question to Dr. Ford was disrespectful in any way. She was treated with courtesy and dignity as I promised her. But the questions my Democrat colleagues asked Judge Kavanaugh were unequivocally and universally hostile. My colleagues first claimed that the Senate doesn't confirm Supreme Court nominees in midterm elections. The Washington Post fact checker said that's false. Indeed, Justice can we have quiet, please? I would expect the same quiet for other people on the committee when they speak. Anyway, indeed, Justice Breyer and Kagan were both confirmed in midterm elections. Then the second attempt was to argue that we needed to request all Judge Kavanaugh's executive branch records. But they completely ignored the fact that we did not request all of Justice Kagan's executive branch records. Indeed, her most recent and relevant executive branch records from the Solicitor General's office were not requested, even despite the fact that Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most Even though Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most powerful court in the country, issuing 307 opinions and joining hundreds of others, we received over 480,000 pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time on the executive branch. This was more pages of such documents than the last 5 Supreme Court nominees combined. In short, it was the most thorough and transparent confirmation process at all. I'm going to put the rest of my statement in the record because I'm sure a lot of people are irritated right now, and I'll let them express that irritation. We'll go by seniority, so I'll call on Senator Feinstein and put the rest of my statement in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very disappointed that we're here today voting on this nomination, especially in light of the testimony that we heard just yesterday. My Republican colleagues spent their time at the hearing focused exclusively on policy and on partisanship and process. The majority argued that the sexual assault Dr. Ford experienced was nothing more than a Democratic smear campaign that I am allegedly orchestrating. My staff and I were accused of leaking Dr. Ford's letter, which we did not. We were accused of leaking Deborah Ramirez's letter, which we did not. We were said to have refused to participate in the partisan, quote, investigation, end quote. Yet it is the Republicans who have refused to talk to Debbie Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. Republicans also failed to mention Democrats were not notified and had no idea the chairman's staff had been communicating with Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, and apparently at least 2 other individuals who have not been named. Instead, Democrats learned about this outreach when various letters or emails appeared in the press. And in one case, we learned about the Republican staff outreach at 10 p.m. the night before the hearing. Ironically, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have gone so far as to say this whole situation was nothing more than a nefarious attempt at political theater. I understand why they did that. The Senate is a political body. However, I was shocked to see Judge Kavanaugh take the same tone and strategy. Candidly, in the 25 years on this committee, I have never seen a nominee for any position behave in that manner. Judge Kavanaugh used as much political rhetoric as my Republican colleagues, and what's more, he went on the attack. He yelled at Democrats for having the temerity to express our frustration for not having access to over 90% of his record, and said that some Democratic members were, quote, an embarrassment, end quote. He'd accused Democrats of, quote, lying in wait, end quote, and replacing, quote, advice and consent with search and destroy, end quote. He even went so far as to say that Dr. Ford's allegations were nothing more than, quote, a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2018 election, end quote, and, quote, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, end quote. Unbelievable. This was not someone who reflected an impartial temperament or the fairness and even-handedness one would see in a judge. This was someone who was aggressive and belligerent. I have never seen someone who wants to be elevated to the highest court in our country behave in that manner. In stark contrast, the person who testified yesterday and demonstrated a balanced temperament was Dr. Ford. She gave powerful testimony about her experience of being physically and sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh. She started by saying how she was terrified to be before the committee, but she felt it was her civic duty to tell us what happened to her. She recounted her experience, and I quote, "I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me," end quote. Both Brett and Mark were drunkenly laughing during the attack. They seemed to be having a very good time, end quote. Another quote, "Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details. I didn't want to tell my parents that I, at age 15, was in a house without any parents present, drinking beer with boys. I convinced myself that because Brett did not rape me, I should just move on and pretend that it didn't happen," end quote. She was poised, she was credible, and she should be believed. Unfortunately, despite assuring Dr. Ford her allegations would be taken seriously and she would be treated respectfully. That is not what ultimately happened. As I noted in my statement yesterday, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle had their minds made up before one word was uttered. A week ago, the majority leader declared, quote, "In the near future, Judge Kavanaugh will be on the United States Supreme Court. So, my friends, keep the faith. Don't get rattled by all this. We're going to plow right through it," end quote. This was not about ensuring a fair process. This was about doing the bare minimum. And finally, to my Republican colleagues who are so upset about the time that has passed, let's be clear. Dr. Ford asked for confidentiality, and that's what I did. We all know that if I had referred her allegations to the FBI when she would not come forward, there would have been nothing to do. The FBI would have had an anonymous allegation with no name, no contact information, and no way to follow up. In addition, Dr. Ford's allegations were referred to the FBI on September 12th, over 2 weeks ago. If the President and the Republican majority had asked for the FBI to do an investigation at that time, like we asked, it would likely be finished by now. And most importantly, when Judge Kavanaugh has talked to Republicans repeatedly, none of us have spoken to or questioned Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, or the polygraph examiner. None of us have talked to or questioned James Roach, Lynn Brooks, Liz Swisher, Tom Kaine, or Chris Dudley. Not one senator, as far as I know, has had the opportunity to or question Deborah Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. My colleagues are right that we should not rush to judgment, and it's not fair to assume Judge Kavanaugh is guilty without gathering the information. But it's equally unfair to have heard from a credible, poised, and brave witness and simply ignore what we heard and move forward immediately. I don't know Deborah Ramirez. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. I don't know Judy Swetnick. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. But I do know this. Dr. Ford provided credible, powerful testimony that deserves to be considered and not dismissed as a partisan smear campaign, which it was not. In my opening statement yesterday, I talked about the differences between Me Too and the Year of the Woman, and I highlighted the seriousness of sexual assault and harassment. I started out by saying, I hoped we would do better and show women that our country, our committee, has in fact changed. This isn't a political battle for power, as some have said. This is a serious undertaking with serious allegations. While the Republican strategy is no longer attack the victim, it is ignore the victim. The entire country is watching now how we handle these serious allegations. It is, in fact, a real test for the United States Senate and for our country to see how we treat women, especially women who are survivors of sexual assault. I believe we can do better, and I hope we are better. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record a longer statement that addresses some of the attacks regarding my office's handling of Dr. Ford's allegations and the Republican administration.
Obviously, without objection, those will be included. Before I call on Senator Hatch, since this keeps coming up about the FBI investigation, I'd like to repeat what you've heard from me so many times, but I guess we never get this, get people understanding. We can't learn anything from the FBI that we can't learn ourselves. The Senate has our own constitutional duty and our own investigators to follow up on these allegations. I don't think we should discredit the sentence. Constitutional duty of oversight is a co-equal independent branch of government. If the people on the other side of the aisle sincerely want an FBI investigation, I would ask why they did not notify me of Dr. Ford's then confidential letter way back in July so the FBI could weigh in. The FBI would honor confidentiality, and so would I. And I've had 38 years reputation of protecting constitutionality or confidentiality of whistleblowers. Another span of time for an FBI investigation is, as my Democrat colleagues have called for, or even more recently people outside calling for, would result in another time of brutal attacks on Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh and their families. They don't deserve those sorts of vile threats that they're receiving, and it's unacceptable. Dr. Ford has stated no objections to an FBI investigation. So why has the need for an FBI investigation only come to our attention here in the last several days, probably less than 2 weeks? It's been 60 days since Dr. Ford's letter was made public. Then we've had some comment about why we didn't investigate Ramirez. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them, unlike our Democratic colleagues, some of whom sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the committee.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me for interrupting, but could we have order?
Yeah.
Well, in fact, I would agree on the order. The order would be that we go back and forth, and apparently you're going to have 2 Republicans speaking and 1 Democrat. Is that what the chairman's doing?
That's what, absolutely. After I get done, and I'm not giving an opening statement, I'm explaining, as a chairman ought to explain, the work of the committee to people that don't seem to understand it. I'll call on Senator Hatch when I'm done, and then I'm going to call on you, Senator Leahy. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them. Unlike our Democrat colleagues, some of who sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the chairman. I first learned of her allegations when they became public in the article New Yorker, published late Sunday evening, September 23rd. My staff immediately contacted her counsel asking when she was available for an interview with committee investigators. The next afternoon, Monday, September 24, her counsel responded that Ms. Ramirez, quote, has accurately relayed what she recalls to the New Yorker. Her counsel, end of quote. Her counsel added, however, that, quote, she would welcome an investigation by the FBI into this investigation and would cooperate with such. On appropriate terms, she would also agree to be interviewed in person, end of quote. Over the 24th and the 25th of this month, my staff repeatedly asked Ms. Ramirez's counsel 2 questions before setting up a call to discuss her allegations so that such a call could actually be meaningful and useful. Whether, number 1, whether she had, quote, any other evidence, including other statements, in addition to those that are contained in the New Yorker article, end of quote. And 2, whether she was, quote, willing to provide her evidence, including her testimony, to committee investigators, end of quote. My staff repeatedly made clear that it welcomed, quote, the receipt of Ms. Ramirez or anyone else's evidence in the form of a letter or email.
There's the split screen. Kamala Harris and Senator Blumenthal left the hearing room, and now they found a microphone nearby in the hallway. Just drop in for their argument now.
From the beginning on this, it should not be about raw power influencing the outcome. of a decision that is about not only a statement about what we hold as being precious and important about our system of justice, but who will sit for a lifetime on the United States Supreme Court. And this has been about raw power. You're seeing that in display in this hearing this morning. You've been seeing it from the process from the beginning. Failure to give us the documents. Failure to interview all the witnesses. Failure to give us the ability to do a sufficient background check to know who this individual is. It's been pushing and pushing and ramming this thing through because they have the power, as opposed to the integrity to say, let the American people know what's about to happen. Have transparency in the system. Have integrity in the system. This is a failure of this body to do what it has always said it's about, which is be deliberative.
How much coordination and discussion did you all do in advance of yesterday's hearing, and why was there so much focus on the FBI investigation that you were calling for rather than the substance of Judge Kavanaugh's past?
You don't think an FBI investigation is at the core of all of this?
Yeah, right.
What have we been saying if not that? We need a minimum investigation. And by the way, we did not coordinate walking out. You know, we feel this in here.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, and that's what all the people out there are
Coordination of the questioning, the line of questioning at yesterday's hearing. Did you all discuss the questions that you would ask Judge Kavanaugh?
What does that matter, really?
Grievances now being aired on both sides. The vote is on the docket for 1:30 this afternoon. Back inside the hearing room, and the chairman, Chuck Grassley, now.
Serious criminal activity. She continued to attend them. And somehow the FBI missed Judge Kavanaugh's 6 full field background investigations while he worked in a high-profile position in the White House and the judiciary. The fact that he was a regular participation in these gang rape parties. Now, that ought to get a lot of people's attention. We had 6 full field background investigations by the FBI, and what he was accused of by Miss Sedgwick never showed up. And that ought to be, if it was that much of an activity on his part, surely the FBI would know about it. Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very difficult set of hearings.